All right, let's
Go
go ahead
for
and get
it.
started, everyone. Hi. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for being here with us today to discuss the journey to adaptation and belonging in the workplace. We appreciate you joining us today and taking some time out of your busy day to learn, to discuss. We want this to be very conversational with you, our audience. So please feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A. And we'll get to those questions following our discussion here today. So it's going to be very kind of casual today, and we're going to be discussing adaptation and belonging, of course, in the workplace. So if you have to leave, how to participate here, the Q&A, this just shows you where the Q&A is in case you're not familiar with Zoom Q&A. Please go ahead and just ask those questions. And again, we may not answer them on the spot, but we'll get to them following our discussion today. So um, if you have to leave before the end of the hour, please go ahead and take our survey. You will be prompted as you exit to take the 5-question survey. We would appreciate any feedback that you would provide us today. This is our very first Woke USA webinar, so we'd love any feedback that you have for us, positive, negative, anything you want to share with us. We are happy to receive that feedback from you. I'm going to hand it over to my partner Zuca, and Zuca is going to tell you a little bit about Woke USA and also introduce himself, and then I'll come back and introduce myself and our guest panelists today. Zuca, go right ahead.
Thank you so much, Caroline, for the great intro. Hey, Adeola. Hello, JP. How are you two doing today? Thanks, everyone, for joining. So very quickly about Woke. We're a Brazilian-based company founded in São Paulo. We founded Woke in 2019 specifically, but we've been operating since 2016. And basically, Woke is a tech-enabled company focused specifically in companies undergoing growth transformation. So majority of our clients are startups and scale-ups that are facing growth phase, and traditional economy organizations who are facing digital or leadership transformation. We combine a very different way of looking at the markets. So the heart of the company comes from executive search. But we believe definitely that there's a lot of change in the future in this industry. So we're combining technology, data, and also additional services that focus on the entire talent strategy, right? From the relationship between the beginning and end of the cycle between a professional and an organization, right? We know how careers are a lot more liquid right now. We know how sense of belonging, values, purpose are very important, and we know that careers are not linear anymore. So naturally, the whole ecosystem is adapting and evolving, and we're following that trend, really focusing on making a very different impact to how we can provide services to both ends. So on one end today, our focus, if you can go back, Caroline, very quickly, sorry. We wanted to, our concentration right now is mainly in Brazil and now in the US. The focus is for next year to really establish a presence around startups and scale-ups and our services across the entire Americas. And so that's stage 3 of our market penetration. And we provide basically 3 main services from Woke specialists, which is executive search, leadership development, both B2B, and then career management on the B2C side. And we've got a technology practice that actually focused, which is a separate company called Woke Tech, which has a SaaS, which is an all-in-one platform. And then Woke Careers is a marketplace for professionals. How can we bring back thought leadership for everyone? And today in the US, we have a partnership for our placement services with Into, which is going really well. And on the back end, we've got our Woke corporates that provide services for both of these organizations. Yes, go for it. Sorry. So yeah, since 2015, 16, really focusing on changing that, and the topic today really is focusing on the aspect that 50% of external hires fail within the first year, and within 18 months, in general. And why? Several things that happen during the recruitment process, but the main aspect happens after, the start date. So we combine a very different approach, which is a program called PAP, which is a performance and adaptation acceleration program, which consists of basically 2 cycles that we studied a lot about, usually what we go through whenever we join a new organization. So I think this is very relevant. That's why we chose the topic for this webinar. For everyone, as we've got hard data that more than 40% of the world, I would say, it's a bold topic, but have considered or moved careers, right, in the last 4 years. So from that perspective, you go through 2 cycles, and the first one is the adaptation cycle, which is the most critical one, and the other one is the development and performance. So how can you really apply a different view into strategically thinking about what you need to do and how to adapt, and how can also a company use that, and how can they adapt as a hiring manager to the people that are coming in as newly hires. So we bring today Adeola and JP to show and tell their experiences onboarding their new organizations. Adeola is right at the 4th or 5th month with Tramontina, and JP is just past the 6th month with Majority. So I'll let Caroline run the formal introductions.
You didn't introduce yourself.
Well, yes. So very quickly then, to avoid going long-winded, but so I'm originally from Sao Paulo. I was a student athlete, passionate about soccer. I have 2 kids, a 4-year-old and a 9-year-old, lovely wife called Chris. And I've been in the US here, back to the US in 2015, and I'm the managing partner for Woke here in the US. So I run all the executive search, aspects of our services.
Excellent. Thanks, Zuca. Okay. Everyone, I'm Caroline Vernon. For those of you on the call that don't know me, most of you that on the call have probably know me since I invited you here. But I'm the partner here at Woke USA for the Career and Leadership Advisory practice. I'm in Omaha, Nebraska. I have 3 children of my own, 4 stepchildren, several dogs come and go out of here, but I've spent my career in the world of work in some regard, whether it be employee engagement, talent selection, career development, leadership development, and outplacement as well. One of my most proud accomplishments, of course, is the fact that I have personally coached over 5,000 people in transition. So that is something that I'm very proud of. Let's go ahead and introduce our guest today, Adeola Adeosun. Adeola has over a decade of experience in the digital space, from Fortune 500 companies to brands sold in the world's largest retailers, beginning her career in the brick and mortar customer focused selling in 2010 and quickly transitioning to the digital space in 2012. Her focus on relationships, service-based leadership style, and infectious passion have been hallmarks of her career. Welcome, Adeola. Thank you so much for joining us today. And as Zuca said, Adeola is one of our newly placed executives, and she is in the adaptation process right now, going through the PAP. So we asked her to join us to share her experiences with that today. So thank you so much, Adeola. You want to say hello to everyone?
Yes. Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here, and I can't wait to share the rest of my experiences.
Awesome. Next, we have Juan Pablo D'Alessandro. JP, as he allowed me to call him, started his career in consulting, working for Fortune 500 companies. He moved on to the airline industry, where he managed the Asia sales operation for Latin America's largest airline before deciding to get an MBA at Georgetown University. JP has always been involved in entrepreneurship, specifically in the technology space. This led him to spend several years at Endeavor's VC fund, and is currently managing the U.S. Hispanic operations at Majority, our client. a fintech that focuses on serving immigrants in the US. Welcome, JP. Thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Zuca, and thank you everyone for listening to my story. Hopefully, I'll share something interesting for everyone.
Great. And as the same as Adeola, JP is a newly placed executive at Majority, so he is also in the process of adaptation as well. So welcome everyone. Okay. So what does adaptation mean in the workplace? So knowing how to adapt to your new environment. I am also new here, so I'm also learning. I'm also in the adaptation, newish. I'm also in the adaptation phase. So knowing how to adapt to a new workplace culture is, of course, vital to anyone's success and their performance in their role. No matter how positive the move is, joining a new company can be scary. It can be a challenge. Everyone feels uncertain in that new environment. So you're meeting new people, and that includes taking on new responsibilities, having a plan in place, including the hiring managers, helps to accelerate performance and the adaptation of the newly hired executive or newly hired associate. It helps them to develop critical pillars in their acculturation and their performance. And learning these processes and systems and businesses early can really help to accelerate the learning and the performance needed to really, adapt well in their new role. So let's talk about the importance of adaptation and the sense of belonging. When we look at this, we look at a Deloitte study on the human capital, their latest human capital study. Ranks belonging as one of the top human capital issues that organizations face today. This is fairly, in my experience in the workplace, it's fairly a newer topic because we didn't really realize how critical adaptation and a sense of belonging was to the success and to the retention of that individual. So in fact, 73% of people that were asked by Deloitte responded that fostering a sense of belonging was important to the organization's success, with 93% agreeing that a sense of belonging drives organizational performance. But let's talk about why this is such a rising, important topic for organizations, especially since we've all gone to kind of a remote world here. Having that sense of belonging and adapting to the new culture is so much more important than it even was 4 years ago. Because sometimes we can feel in a remote world like we're on an island. So that's what we're going to be talking about here next. So let's discuss that between Adeola and JP and Zuca and I. Why is adaptation and the sense of belonging, in your opinions, becoming such an increasingly important topic for organizations? Anybody who
Yeah, so
wants?
I can jump in. I think it's becoming increasingly important for organizations because it's becoming increasingly important for the employees. I think, especially in the past 2 years with all the events that occurred, people want to have a sense of belonging at work as well as at home. And I think we weren't forced to grapple with what our organization stood for in the way we have been in the past, like we have been over the past 2 years. You didn't realize how important your organization's feelings about healthcare and public health were until you were faced with a pandemic. So you want to be aligned with your organization, and I think that that's why it's becoming more and more important.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah, and if you allow me to add, I completely agree with that, Deola, there. And there's a couple of interesting things here that you mentioned, Caroline, because you say that almost, I think it was 93% of employers agree that that belonging to an organization has a significant impact. And for me, that's not surprising. What was surprising is to read from Deloitte that 40% of the employees do not feel like they're belonging to the organization. And I think that's actually a huge red flag, tied to what Adeola was saying before. We are human beings, right? And we as human beings, we like to belong wherever we are, not just in the workplace, right? And me being an immigrant, and Zuca, who's from Brazil, can also share or attest to what I'm saying here. When you come to a new place, whether it be a new country, a new company, a new, I don't know, a new school for your kid, where you have new parents, it's really those first couple of days or weeks or months, depending on which the situation is, it's really, I might use the word uncomfortable, but it's not exactly the right word. It's weird. We can use that term, actually. It's not easy to fit in. It's not easy to fit in, right? So what as humans, is we're not fitting in, when we feel like we're not fitting in, we're not giving our best, right? Because we're second guessing ourselves all the time, right? So this is strictly like very, very related to a workplace, right? When you come to a new place, there's new people that come from different backgrounds, that have different knowledge, that know a lot about the company that you're going in there. You're vulnerable, right? You're completely vulnerable because you're learning everything, the context, who's who in the company, and belonging to the company, learning how to belong, or feeling like you're belonging, that you can talk to anyone in the company is crucial, because that will definitely drive your performance.
Yeah, and I'll add a couple of things here from a macro perspective of the last 4 years. If we look at sort of the reality of the impact of leaders who haven't been able to adapt to these organizations, especially when you think at leadership level, right? If you look at traditional organizations, how many times you had eventually, and I think we can all go back to our previous employers and leaders, that you see, a leader coming in who has a completely different culture, a completely different style, and as the organization. So you have groomed all these talent, all these high potentials, and then you have an external leader that comes on top, and eventually that person it's completely off, right? What impact does that do to your organization? So first, you lose your top talent. So when you think about, what happened through the pandemic, is once you remove the proximity and everyone started being remote, and people started looking at the interactions, right? And the values of your leaders and the purpose of the companies, and you're not seeing that on your leadership, you immediately started looking for a job, right? So I think that's a very clear cost, and a very clear, negative impact of what happens when a leader doesn't, or an external hire doesn't pay attention to the environment and doesn't adapt themselves, right? And then you have the other reality, which is the reality of the scale-ups and the startups, where maybe in traditional companies that is fine, but it's the other way around. I mean, you've got these organizations who have who were born with a very clear culture, and that if that leader does not adapt, the entire company is going to potentially expel that leadership. So it also serves for a lot of professionals who are coming from traditional organizations, going into startups, to really pay attention to those values that they were looking for as candidates. And now how can they adapt those values and those competencies to the company culture? And company culture is very difficult to grasp. So that's why it's so important to really, think about all the things that you've said, but that we're all people going through that process. So I just adding 2 layers of thought process here, from when onboarding an organization, especially leading others, of how much of an impact you potentially have on not only retaining your top talent, but also letting go or potentially losing top talent of the organization in the first 4 or 5 months, right? So I think it brings a lot of career aspects and thoughts to this.
Absolutely. Thank you for all of that input from each of you. I appreciate that. It's great. Let's move on to Zuca. I think you wanted to talk about why 50% of external hires fail in the first 18 months, including at the executive level. We talked about it a little bit before, but I think, going into detail about our research on this topic and what led us to building an adaptation and acceleration of performance program, and the importance of that program after after somebody, we don't end that relationship when we place somebody. We have to continue that relationship to help with that adaptation process. So why don't you go ahead and if you want to chat on this topic first, and then we'll go on
Yes.
to the next question.
And I thank you, Caroline. I think this serves for everyone, right? I mean, we are always in a state of our professional life, for what we want for us, right? For our families and careers. We're also in the stage of representing an organization, right? So, as hiring managers, right, when you look at it, and as candidates, I think it always goes down to the fact that aligning all expectations and really taking time to have a self-assessment on what you want from your career and what are the reasons why you're leaving a job, or what are you looking for in that stage of the career. They need to be a match to the other end as well, which what are you looking for within your organization, and what kind of person, right, and what kind of competencies and what kind of diversity and equity are you bringing into eventually your newly hires. And I think the main reason why eventually these hires fail is not paying attention to the core facts of what competencies you need, right, or the organization needs to reach performance. And I think everyone thinks of the technical side, and we look at cultural fits in a subjective way, but we don't appreciate really, what are the things that will drive performance and will drive adaptation. So when we look at the entire executive search process, or a hiring process, could be, it doesn't have to be a leadership hire, you always need to bring those two things. But it's very normal that you have HR doing a piece of cultural fitting and you have the hiring manager doing the technical fitting. So I think it's a great moment to actually have everyone, including the candidate, create a very transparent, opportunity here to understand the beginning and the end, because no one comes ready. And I think at the end is when you think of what are you really looking for, and what is non-negotiable that this person needs to bring, but what are the set of skills that if this person has certain competencies, this person will learn during the first 90, 120 or 6 months, because we've all seen and all leaders talk about how they adapted to different markets. So it's just thinking that way as well, that not only thinking about the recruitment process, but also putting a lot of effort as a leader and as a candidate in the post-placement aspect, right? Which then leads to the adaptation journey. So I'll leave it here so that everyone can talk a little bit about maybe if they have, where have they adapted and where are they paying more attention right through it.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So why do you believe external, you talked a little bit about why external hires fail at such an alarming rate. It's an alarming rate. 50% is an alarming rate for such a short
Totally.
tenure of time. So, in everybody, so if you all want to talk about why do you think that's, Adeola and JP being in this adaptation period of time, and myself included, why, in your opinion, do you believe that this is, that external hires are failing at such an alarming rate? Is it different than something that Zuca has already touched on? Is there something that you believe is a trigger, a real, red flag as far as, why these external hires are failing at such an alarming rate?
Yeah, I mean, I can go Adiola, but if you want to go first, yeah. So actually, something that Zuca mentioned in a couple of slides ago that really stuck with me, which is completely true. Culture is extremely difficult to grasp. And we as executives or as employees, we constantly talk about culture and we throw the word culture in the conversations, right? The culture is not great, the culture is great, the culture this, culture that. And at the end of the day, it's really hard to understand what culture is, because organizations are managed by people, right? And people don't really understand how other people are, right? And sometimes it's even hard for me to understand when they ask me, hey, how are you? Like if you stop and think about it, like, who are you? And it takes me a while to think about who is JP, who is Juan Pablo, right? So imagine that for an organization that has not just one guy, but maybe 50, 100 or more than 1,000 people working for them. So I mentioned that because I think one of the biggest issues why people, or you guys, of course, are much more experts than I am in this matter, but one of the a big reason why people quit their jobs or for some reason don't stay after 18 months is because they don't fit in with the culture. And there's two reasons why. One, to my mind, one of them is the organizations don't really know how to explain what their culture is, what they stand for, what they are, what they believe in, what their purpose is. The famous why that Simon Sinek talks about all the time.
Or the values, right? What you see on the wall, right?
Exactly, what you see on the wall, yeah. Which, I mean, I don't know, 90% of the cases, just for some people, it's just words that look cool, right? I'm being over dramatic here, right? But
don't worry.
But so one issue is organizations don't really know how to explain what their why is, what their purpose, what their culture is. And on the other hand, people don't really know how to understand, they don't understand what exactly they want for their own career, right? And this goes, of course, I think it's
100%.
Yeah, and I think it's a much bigger issue for earlier, for younger people, right? I remember when I was 20, 22, 24, and even 28 years old, and I thought that I wanted to do marketing and I wanted to do this and I wanted to do finance and I wanted to do, but in reality, like as I grew older and I grew wiser as well, but I think that's the circle of life, right? I start to understand, like, yeah, that job that I applied to when I was 24 that I wasn't even interviewed for, of course I didn't have the right profile for that because that wasn't me, right? Or the company wasn't me, right? So I think it's a shared responsibility between the companies and the people, right? And that's a big issue. And I was mentioning the younger generations because right now, I mean, I've been reading reports and learning about, the 18, 20-year-olds, 22-year-olds, they're much more focused on purpose. So I think right now for those people, for companies who want to hire the best talents, they really need to up their game on understanding like how they portray themselves to the employees, especially younger generations.
Yeah, and that goes in many ways, right? JP, and I can talk a little bit about that later after Adeola, but I think that goes into many, many layers of what is the process, right? Of understanding where I'm going to work, which is also very transactional and very shallow, right? And to say the least. So I'll stop here. Adeola, for you to comment.
Yeah, so that's perfect that you said that, because that's essentially where I was headed, was that I think both parties are very, very focused on what they can get out of it. The candidate is very focused on the package, and the employer is very focused on what the candidate's skills are, which is both things are very, very important, but that's not everything. So I think that there's a lot that can be done. And also it's back to what JP said about values, asking why. Asking the candidate why, asking the employer why do you like this person? Why do you want to work here? And kind of continuing to ask why until you get to an answer that really is, like the pressed down, concentrated version of what they're actually trying to say. Because I think in a lot of job interviews, they're trying to be too polite. So I think having a third party where you can be real with both sides of the transaction can be real is super helpful. And I remember, Zuca, when you were recruiting me for this role, you asked me a lot of questions of, okay, but like, why? And you just kept asking why. And I was like, I came to a realization myself that, okay, maybe I am a better fit for this company. This company is a better fit for me than I originally thought, because you continued to ask why. So, yeah.
Cool. Great. And go for it, JP.
Sorry, Zuca, that I interrupt you, because Adeola just mentioned something Adeola just mentioned something that's super important that I hadn't realized until just now that she mentioned it. When I was interviewing for the company that I'm working for now with Zuca, actually, so when I had my first conversation, I do recall that in this particular case, Zuca was the third person that I truly felt like I could be 1,000,000% honest. Like, you know what, it was just like, maybe I'm exaggerating, but he was kind of like a psychologist trying to understand what I needed, and he helped me realize what I needed or what I wanted. So having that like third person that opens up your mind and allows you to be open about what you're feeling or saying or thinking is crucial. It's crucial in this new endeavor that people have.
Well, first of all, thank you for that. That's great. I think it just helps us to show that we are trying to do things differently, and that there is a very valuable impact of doing things in a different way where you're not selling it, right? And eventually that you're also part of what happens afterwards. And I think that translates also to a coach, right? Which is also Caroline's side, which is, why sometimes it's good to talk to a third party. It doesn't have to be a professional. It could be, everyone has a mentor. Everyone has, friends and people that we look up to. And usually they provide a lot of valuable insights, right? I think everything starts with self-awareness, as a hiring manager, as a company, and as a professional, right? And it's, Caroline keeps reminding me that, a lot of people do not have that, right? I mean, so I think the start of everything is understanding who you are and what you are and feeling good about that. What are your strengths, right? And what are your weaknesses? And do you want to work on your weaknesses to continue to grow in a certain direction or not? Because some weaknesses not necessarily mean, or some gaps not necessarily mean that you're not going to be successful. It's just that maybe for certain organizations in certain roles, those are going to not necessarily drive performance. But I think an interesting aspect that combining these two things, at least to me, who, I've been 11 years in executive search for a multinational before eventually feeling that I needed to do something different and wanting to, be an entrepreneur and join Woke here. It's the fact that executive search combines with coaching and development afterwards, and we can participate to not only focus on the clients that we really want to represent and really understanding who we are representing, because since we are part of the later stage, we really get to know the companies. We really dive into the cultural aspects of why these companies are different. But I think this is an acquired skill that if hiring managers and HR leaders and founders realize, I think a lot of them already do that, that's, being transparent and really looking at the people aspect and what are the core values, and looking at DEI from the beginning, of really not trying to fill a DEI scenario because you need to, but really who am I looking for and what is my culture? That really changes the process from being a selling process from both sides and really being a transparent conversation. It's like a relationship, right? I usually talk and I joke that, I'm setting up a blind date, but actually talking about what's going to happen when everyone gets married. And I think that's the best way to look at it as a matchmaker, right? In a way.
That's absolutely right. You set up this next slide very nicely. So thank you for teeing that up for me, Zuca. That's appreciated. But, one of the most critical pillars of adaptation is an inclusive workplace, or the reverse. One of the most critical pillars of an inclusive workplace is adaptation, and a sense of belonging, of course. So let's, to me, inclusion is your ability to show up, to be authentic, to bring not only your skill set to a workplace, but also, who you are as a human being. We talk about, a very humane approach to leadership is to help this newly hired person adapt to the culture. Just in my own sense, I've joined a Brazilian company. There is a very obvious language barrier, but it's something that
and we're working on it, right?
A different way to adapt.
It's not an easy.
You know what I mean? It's a different way to adapt. It's a different pillar. It's a different thing to adapt to. That's new for me. But that's what happens, and when you join a company that is a global organization. I'm sure, and JP, you can attest to that. Zuca, you can both attest to that kind of thing. But we don't all join organizations from the same starting point, and that's what equity is all about. You know, we need different resources to feel that sense of belonging, and if there's an imbalance between diversity and equity and inclusion, it has consequences on both the organization. It has consequences on the new employee, and innovation suffers because of it. And then, of course, turnover costs start to rack up. But when we create a workplace centered around DEI, we can build a higher sense of belonging and more productivity and better business outcomes as well. But the core principle, I think, in my opinion, is allowing the space and the grace for new people to make mistakes. You know, everybody is a human being, and because of that space and grace, I believe will lend itself so nicely to better, more productive, more accelerated performance, more accelerated sense of belonging, and our workplace evolves so frequently. It changes so frequently that our our world evolves so frequently that our workplace needs to follow right behind it. So let's talk about this topic now on building an inclusive workplace, and how has your adaptation, both you, Adeola, and JP, how has your adaptation led to a greater sense of belonging? Your ability to bring your whole self to work, not just your skills, but your whole self to work. How has that led to a greater sense of belonging in your organizations?
Yeah, so I think the process that what people took me through, but then also the personal adaptation that I did when I started here is the combination that I needed, honestly. So I think obviously I knew I was going to have to adapt. Every role that you have, every company you move to, you have to change a little bit, and I was very prepared for that. But I was also prepared to be extremely uncomfortable for quite a while, and we've greatly reduced the time that I've been uncomfortable, because I think the most powerful thing that I was offered during this transitional period was Zuca knowing how I was going to react at a psychological level. So one of the meetings that we had, where he was kind of presenting how I will be feeling, I was like, how do you know that? Like, he was like, this is the feeling that you're feeling, and this is how
Have a magic ball.
Yeah, in an
A
action.
crystal ball.
And I was like, how does he know this? And it helped me because it made me feel so much more comfortable that, one, if he knew it, that means that other people are experiencing this. So I wasn't beating myself up so much about it. But then also identifying, okay, this reaction that I'm having to these emotions that I didn't even realize I was feeling is not going to serve me long term or even short term. I'm going to set myself up for failure. So it allowed me to step back, be comfortable with this feeling of like not knowing what's next and being the new kid, and really, really helped me overcome them quicker than I would have, and able to form relationships with people, because I was so focused on proving myself that I wasn't building relationships with my coworkers, which ultimately is what's going to lead to me being the most productive member of this workforce.
Absolutely.
Especially when you're in a stage, right? I mean, and of course, this is great to look at it from different angles, and that's the beauty of transitioning an executive search process to the adaptation. When you think of talent acquisition and talent development, right? That's when there's a valley a lot of the times, and that's exactly when the consulting firm, the recruiting firm, says, "Hey, I've done my job," right? But when you look at it, the context, right, that you were in, Adeola, it's Tramontina is a very well-known company, a traditional organization, but you're the head of e-commerce, and differently than a lot of e-commerce businesses, your resources are in other departments, right? So you need to use them as a center of shared services, right? So that's why I think it's very important that you realize that early, because for that aspect, you had to build those relationships to be successful, which is what you're going to start doing now. Is how do you influence the organization, understanding what happened before you came on board, right? And this is fairly different than those relationships also on JP, who joined a startup Series A to B with high growth, where so I think it's there are those nuances of the personal aspects are the same, but applying the context that was linked to why this role is so important, those are the key differences that make the impact at the business, right?
Yeah, and Adeola mentioned something super interesting about feeling uncomfortable. I feel like everyone feels uncomfortable probably constantly, but more so during the first couple of weeks or months, or yeah, in a new job, right? And I think what has helped me in the past is, you know, feeling comfortable being uncomfortable. I feel like, because we're never going to be 100% comfortable, right? At least in my experience, it has never happened. And I also want to mention something that Caroline discussed just now, which is organizations that allow for their employees to fail, let's call it that way. And I know it sounds a little bit cliche, but to make mistakes are, for me, are always winning organizations, because we're all human. We all make mistakes in every aspect of our lives, right? So being sincere with ourselves and saying, hey, we're all going to screw up at some point, right? And I want to bring to the table just one example. When I started working for Majority, I remember there was something that I felt like there was a question that I needed to answer that I felt like I should know the answer to. And I kept thinking about it and trying to look through files and trying to talk to people if I could find the answer. And I didn't want to ask my boss because, you know, it was something that I felt like I was supposed to know, right? But, you know, at one point I was like, you know, I need to ask it because I need to know this to be able to continue. I was a little bit scared, and I remember his exact reaction. He was like, he paused for 1 second, he thought about it, and he said, I don't know. And I was like, you don't know, this is something that everyone needs to know, right? Like, you don't know? No, I don't know. And that actually was my cue for understanding, hey, you know, it's completely fine if you screw up, if you make a mistake, if you don't know something, that's totally fine, right? So I think it's also it comes from the top in those situations, right? You need to lead by example, which is something that we all know. But when it actually happens, it is like a huge safety net that you have below you. There's like, you know what, I'll try, because and it makes sense from a business perspective, right? For the companies, especially the companies in the earlier stage, like the one I'm at, you know, it makes much more sense from a business perspective to have employees that are willing to dare and to try and to, you know, make mistakes, than having a team of people who are, you know, doing the perfect amount of whatever it needs to be done. So I think it's interesting. Yeah.
And Caroline, I'm gonna cue you on something that I think you provide a more interesting view than mine. But when looking at sort of the current onboarding programs of a lot of organizations, especially at leadership level, I would say they're almost non-existent in the human factor, right? I mean, the onboarding programs are a lot focused on what do we do and what we're all about, and what you need to know. But they, you know, the relationship of asking, how are you doing, right? How are you feeling? And actually having two executives have that conversation early, it's unheard of unless it comes from the hiring manager, or unless it really is the type of person that really needs that and is able to structure that, or they have a previous relationship already. So that's why we concentrate so much the first 120 days into, you know, 4 check-ins to really bring forward the courage and the aspect that we humans are in a survival mode in the first 90 days. And that the hiring manager has a very, very important aspect to make sure that that bridge is created right in the beginning, to have courageous conversations. And it doesn't also mean that one-on-ones need to be all about the business. Yes, the business will follow, but, you know, have that time to find that spark, because we all talk about the click, right, through the recruitment process, but that click usually doesn't happen afterwards. You know, that's not maintained. And I always see that the human factor is very, very important to create that ability to have courageous conversations within the first 90 to 100 days, 120 days. So Carolina, I think you could probably add some color here,
Yeah,
which
you
adds
know,
to the sense of belonging, right?
so absolutely. And JP, you mentioned something that I wanted to kind of, take another to a different or add another step to that. And that is, that feeling of being vulnerable is, as my favorite researcher, Brene Brown, she talks about vulnerability and how difficult it is to feel vulnerable and be comfortable in your skin while you're feeling vulnerable. Um, but also adaptation is something that I've had to learn. It's not just adapting to your culture, the nuances of the culture. It's also and learning new things, but it's also unlearning things that you've done in the past. Even those things that have made you successful, they don't necessarily translate to the new environment. And so, the culture of my former organization is different than the culture of this organization. And the way that I adapted there is going to be different because of that. And so that's a piece of the adaptation process that I think is highly overlooked, and that it's not just learning all you can learn. It's also the process of unlearning those things that don't serve you, like you said earlier, Adeola. So that is definitely a point that I wanted to bring up. Um, Zuka, did you want to take this part, or did you want me to go ahead and take this part? We kind of
I think
wavered back and forth.
yeah, I think go for it. Just go for it. And I think I can add a final layer into
Okay.
sort of company perspective. I think there is an important part, in my view, of what's happening right now to the world with current market conditions. So I think I can close it. So go for it.
Yeah. So, adapting to a new environment, and we've talked about this is kind of a repeat, I think, but it is developing that sense of belonging. It definitely impacts the business performance as well. And I think we need to talk about more about the business performance and the employee well-being, but belonging is necessary for bringing out the best in everyone at work. If employees don't experience that sense of belonging, they're likely to feel insecure, which we've already talked about their place in the organization, about their feeling authentic, like they can bring their authentic stuff. So you're talking about, you're openly sharing ideas, and you're worried, you're psychologically, if you're psychologically safe, you're concerned about that. But feeling that adaptation to that organization, that sense of belonging, helps to improve your psychological safety, which then of course does impact performance in the organization, because you are more innovative, you feel more free to be creative, and those are things that that are overlooked when people say, oh, it's just, what they're onboarding, they're off and running, they should be contributing to the success of the organization. If they're not feeling psychologically safe in that organization during that adaptation process, then their performance will suffer and they will struggle, because what happens is they stop collaborating, they stop wanting to collaborate, they stop wanting to deliver ideas, they stop wanting to come up with new and exciting innovation. So let's, if workers, there's a study, I believe it's still the same Deloitte study, that if workers feel like they belong, there is a 56% increase in job performance, a 50% drop in turnover risk, and a 75% reduction in sick days. And if you're a company of 10,000 people, which I don't believe anybody on the call is a part of that large of an organization, but if you are, that would result in an annual savings of $52 million. I mean, that's crazy. So, our research reveals that when employees feel that belonging in the workplace, they're 3 times more likely to feel like they look forward to coming to work. They're 3 times more likely to say their workplace is fun. which we do need to have fun in the workplace. They're 9 times more likely to believe that the people in their workplace are treated fairly regardless of their race or their gender, and they're 5 times more likely to want to stay. So those are all things that relate to the performance of the organization, all because this person is feeling adapted or not. They feel a sense of belonging or not. So go ahead, Zuca, if you wanted to add something, and we can
Thank
go
you for
into
that.
the as well.
Very interesting data for sure. And I think so it gives us time for Q&As and for final thoughts here. I wanted to bring one important fact, which is, since we work a lot with startups and scale-ups as well, and when we look at, what are the performance triggers and how can we predict performance through an external hire, we always need to be conscious of the fact that companies need to make money, right? And at the end of the day, that's what keeps us having jobs, is the company is profitable and potentially can continue to grow, or at least can continue to not be profitable, but be exciting to an investor to take it to the next phase. So what I mean by that is I think everyone in a way, and I think this is a message to what happened, is a lot of mistakes also happen to overhiring. They overhire, you hire exactly not the right competencies for what will drive performance. And one key aspect is just understanding through your adaptation process of what are the quick wins that you can have in many avenues regarding your adaptation, where that is to your self-awareness, whether it's to eventually understanding the business, who are my stakeholders, who are the people that I need to create relationships, understand, adapt to, and then the culture. But at the end of the day, right, if we create that link right at the recruitment process of what was discussed 2 months before that person started, and bring it back in the first 120 days in a constant way of what are the key deliverables, whether they're quick wins or big wins, in 6 months, you can really think about what is my legacy towards the end of my first year. So I think it really comes down to thinking, what do I want from my career, and what is truly the impact that I can make in this organization, and then reviewing those things and asking your managers and your stakeholders if those are the same thing that you think are important, because a lot of people do not do that, and they end up having the turnover later, whether it's surprise or not feeling the belonging, because they felt that they delivered something, but the company did not want that delivery. So those things are very, very important to keep going back to, making sure that you're aligning all the expectations back to eventually what the original conversation was all about. So that's my final touch.
Absolutely. So we have a last question here, and then we have about 6 minutes left, and I think we've talked about how it's accelerated the two of your performance. I do want to make sure we get to one question that was posed earlier, and I think it's a really this goes along very nicely with how the belonging in the workplace and how it's accelerated your performance. But to you, Adeola, and to you, JP, what's the difference in your opinion between onboarding and adapting to your newly to your new roles?
I can go. And I don't know if this is the right answer, by the way, talking about not knowing the answer. But for me, the difference between onboarding and adapting is strictly maybe psychological, right? For me, the adapting part is culturally, how are you fitting in with the organization? How are you feeling with your boss, with your peers, with your subordinates, if you have people in your team? How are you feeling within that context? And onboarding for me is much more the technical part of understanding what are your tasks, like how do you what's the escalation process for whatever issues. And I think it's interesting that you ask that question, because from my past experience, I think all companies except for the one that I'm right now, they all talk about onboarding. They never talk about adapting. They all talk about, hey, we're going through an onboarding process. And I think, you know, how does the CRM work in this company, and how does the email work in this company? Yeah, but interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I agree 100% with JP. I was going to say the same exact thing. Onboarding is task focused, whereas the adaptation process is really focused on the person. How are you feeling and fitting into the group, and are you assimilating, and are they assimilating to you as well? So I think that that's the key difference. Is one is focused on tasks and what you are going to give them, and then the other one is kind of focused on like the mutually beneficial relationship that is going to ultimately form.
Yes, absolutely. And in the last couple of minutes, one of the other questions was, do we ever get pushback from the leader in participating in this adaptation program or acceleration of performance program? Do we, Zuca, you probably, would be able to answer this better than, any of us on this call, but do we ever get pushback since we are including the leader, and we think that is probably one of the most critical pillars of this whole program is including the leader, comparing DISC results, how to empowering the leader on how to best communicate with their newly hired executive. Do we ever get pushback from the leader on participating in this program?
I'd say in the beginning, because it's all part of also understanding what our methodology is, and having done it, and because we work, I think for more startup companies, because the HR structure is also very lean, and sometimes there isn't one. It's not actually, it's how this all started is founders and hiring managers from startups asking, hey, now you place someone, can you please help us develop? And that's how it all really started back in 2017, right? Then later with technology and all these things, we've changed to woke. But the main aspect is in traditional companies quite a lot. And I think the fact comes down to just the unknown. And I think it's the same from competency-based analysis. When you look at the reason why, hiring managers pass on candidates, once you see that in your face, exactly what are you doing, and you could, using technology, kind of expose the data, they can see how much bias is in the process. And I think part of not wanting to use the tool is also because they don't know. So it's just saying, I don't know, I've never done it before. So they feel vulnerable. And I think once you're able to put in the time and understand that this is a process, I know it's new, but it's not rocket science. It really is not. We are here just to bring in the data. So Adeola, I didn't know what you're going to feel, but with research, we realized and we saw data that the majority of people go through that sense, and we go back to our own experiences. So I think when you communicate that to hiring managers, even to HR leaders, that relationship is important, and that can be why are all the recruitment companies not asked to do that, right? Why are you not using a third party to be able to support that? Why are you not using an internal resource to have that conversation regarding adaptation versus onboarding? And I think that exposes that more. When you go through it, it's almost a no-brainer in my view. So short answer is yes, we do get pushback.
It's the top of the hour, so I want to make sure and let everybody off this call right on time. But thank you both, JP and Adeola, for participating.
Thank you.
Of course, thank you for being my co-host here, and thank you all for joining us today. Please feel free and take the survey if you wouldn't mind. We'd love your feedback. Have a wonderful day. Take care, everyone.
Thank you for leading,
Thank you,
Caroline. You did a great job. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.